If this story speaks to you, share it, hit that like button, and subscribe. It takes 3 seconds and means everything. She met me at the door with her arms already open. Not the kind of arms that reach, the kind that have been waiting, practiced, measured out for the right moment. She pulled my face to her neck, said nothing for a beat, then pulled back and looked at me like I was something she'd been afraid of losing. "You made it," she said, and took my bag before I'd even set it down. The house smelled like garlic and warm bread. A candle on the counter, her hair still damp from what I assumed was a shower. I stood in the entryway and felt the kind of ease that settles into a man's shoulders after 2 weeks of hotel ceilings and bad coffee. I thought, this is the version of home that makes the job worth doing. If I had known that feeling would be the last honest thing in that house for a while, I would have paid more attention to it. Her name was Claire. Mine is Dean. We'd been married 6 years, the kind of 6 years where you stop counting anniversaries because time has folded into itself and you've just become a unit, a household, a we. She worked in medical billing, kept decent hours, had a tight circle of friends I knew by face and 1 or 2 by name. We weren't the couple that finished each other's sentences. We were the couple that kept separate reading lamps and didn't need to explain why. It worked, I'd thought. It had been working. Dinner that night was salmon, which she knew I liked, with roasted vegetables arranged with the kind of care you apply when you're trying to say something without saying it. She told me about a problem at work, a coworker who kept reassigning her cases, and I listened the way I always did, not performing attention, just giving it. I asked follow-up questions. She looked pleased. We talked for a while about nothing consequential. The conversation had the easy rhythm of a partnership that hasn't run into anything yet. But something was slightly off. I noticed it the way you notice the angle of a shelf that isn't quite level, not wrong enough to trip over, just enough to register in the corner of your eye. When I mentioned a specific detail about the Denver job site, a detail I'd shared in a call 2 days earlier, her response came a half beat too late. Like she'd had to find the reaction in a drawer she hadn't opened in a few days. Small, barely worth a thought. I filed it away and didn't touch it. The first full day back was quiet in a way that felt deliberately arranged. She had errands, I caught up on paperwork. We crossed paths in the kitchen twice, and both times she smiled the smile of a person who has rehearsed their mood for the day. I told myself I was overthinking. I'd been on a job site for 2 weeks dealing with an elevator system that refused to meet code. I was tired, I was recalibrating, I was reading shadows into blank walls. But then her phone buzzed during dinner that second night, and she flipped it over before the screen went dark. She didn't look at me when she did it. "Who's that?" I asked. "Group chat," she said and picked up her fork. "Work stuff," I nodded, poured more water. Let it go. By the 4th day, I had a short mental list of things I wasn't going to bring up yet. The phone flipped face down on every flat surface like a reflex. The morning walks she'd started taking alone, headphones in, keys in her hand, gone for stretches that were a little long for the neighborhood she described walking. The way she declined the one evening I suggested we go to that bar on Clement Street we used to close down on weeknights before we had a mortgage. "I'm just drained," she said. "Rain check." I gave her the rain check. I'm good at giving those. What I'm not good at is pretending I can't see a pattern when one is forming. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands occupied. I did not stage any conversations, issue any ultimatums, or do the thing some men do when the ground shifts under them. Get louder to feel more stable. I went back to work. I managed the paperwork. I called my brother on a Tuesday and said nothing about any of it because I hadn't assembled enough to say. Then I flew out again for the next rotation. 2 weeks, same hotel, same blueprints, same foreman who thought every structural problem was a vendor problem. I checked in with Claire on the first night. She picked up, sounded warm, asked about the flight. Good, normal. The second night I called at 9 and it went to voicemail. I left nothing and texted instead. She replied at 11, already asleep, work was brutal, talk tomorrow. I said sure and put the phone on the nightstand. Tomorrow I tried again, voicemail. The night after that, same thing. She called me back the following afternoon from what sounded like a parking structure. That particular flat echo, a car door in the distance. Said she'd been overwhelmed. Said she was sorry. Said she missed me. All three things were possible. I had no reason to rule them out. I said I missed her too, which was true, and that I'd be back in 10 days, which was also true, and that we'd figure out the schedule together, which I was less sure about. What happened next changed everything, and it didn't come from Claire. It came from a text. I was reviewing revised schematics on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone lit up with a name I recognized. Margot, Claire's closest friend since college. They'd met freshman year and never really stopped being in each other's orbits. The kind of friendship where two people have seen each other through enough bad decisions that they're bonded by the weight of the shared record. I'd met Margot at a dozen dinners, at a birthday party where she brought a cake that didn't survive the drive, at a housewarming where she danced until she knocked over a standing lamp and laughed harder than anyone at the crash. The text read, "I want to take you to dinner. Are you free this week?" I read it twice, set the phone down, looked at the schematics, picked the phone back up and read it again. My first thought was misdial. My second thought was that Margot had meant to send it to someone else and would realize in about 30 seconds and send a follow-up apology. I gave her the 30 seconds, no follow-up. I gave her 5 minutes, nothing. I put the phone in my pocket and went back to work and spent the next half hour not going back to work. An hour later, "You still there?" I typed back, and I kept it simple because simple is the only honest register when you're not sure what you're dealing with. "Margot, I'm married to your best friend." The reply came in under a minute. I know. She didn't let that stop her from seeing mine. I sat with that sentence for a long time. There's a version of a man that falls apart when he reads something like that. Throws the phone, drives recklessly, makes a call he shouldn't make, says something he can't take back. I know that version exists because I've seen it, because I've been close enough to that edge to know what it feels like underfoot. But that's not what I did. What I did was go outside, stand in the parking lot of the job site in the particular cold of a northern evening, and do the arithmetic quietly. Dates, absences, the flipped phone, the walks, the rain checks, the voice on the line that asked about my flight but didn't ask about the elevator that had been failing inspection for 3 weeks. The arithmetic was not kind. I went back inside and called Margot. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice had the texture of someone who had already been through the bad part of deciding to do this. Not shaking, just worn flat, the way a surface looks after it's been sanded. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough that I stopped being able to pretend I didn't," she said. "When did it start?" A pause. "I started noticing things maybe 6 weeks ago. Little stuff, then bigger stuff." I confronted her once and she laughed it off and then denied it, and I could tell I was being managed. Me pareja. I stopped going to her and started watching instead. Another pause. "I hired someone. I wanted to be certain before I came to you." "And you're certain?" "I wouldn't have texted you if I wasn't." The line was quiet for a moment. Someone from the crew walked past me, nodded, kept going. "I'd rather show you what I have in person," Margot said. Somewhere neutral. I told her I was back in 10 days. She said she'd wait. I asked if she'd said anything to Claire since making the decision to contact me. She said no. I told her to keep it that way and she said she already knew that. We hung up. I stood in the parking lot for another few minutes looking at nothing in particular. Remember to check the link in the description and the pinned comment. Everything from fitness to wellness and beyond is there waiting for you. The 10 days were the strangest stretch of work I've ever done. The elevator rails got sorted, the inspection passed, and I shook hands with the site manager on a Wednesday afternoon feeling like I was watching myself from slightly outside my own body. I called Claire twice during that period. Once she answered, once I left nothing. She texted cheerfully both times I missed her. She sent a photo of the front porch at dusk, the garden chair I'd built last spring. A glass of wine on the armrest. "Look what's waiting for you," the caption said. I looked at the photo for a while. Then I sent a thumbs up and went to the gym. Margot was already at the table when I arrived at the restaurant, a small Italian place off a side street, the kind with paper on the tables and a handwritten menu board. She'd chosen well. No one we knew would be in a room like this. She was wearing a gray jacket, no makeup armor, just her regular face, which somehow made the whole thing feel more serious. A folder sat on the table next to her water glass. I sat down. She didn't try to soften it. "My guy watched 6 locations," she said. "These are the one with the clearest photos." She slid the folder across. I opened it. The photos were taken with the kind of lens that keeps distance but loses nothing in the translation. The locations were places I knew: a coffee shop 3 blocks from our house, the nature trail she'd been podcasting her way through, the parking area behind a gym she'd joined 8 months ago. The man in the frames wasn't a stranger. I'd met him once, briefly, at a work event Margot had hosted the previous spring. He'd shaken my hand with the practiced ease of someone who is very good at making everything seem like just a moment. What registered more than his face was Claire's posture in each frame, unhurried, settled, the posture of someone who is exactly where they expected to be. I tapped the photos into a neat stack and set them face down on the table. "Dates?" I asked. "Lined up with your travel schedule, every trip." I nodded. I asked a few more questions, measured, specific, the kind you ask when you're already past the emotional portion and into the logistics phase. Margot answered everything without dramatizing. She dated the photos, noted the locations, had her investigator write up a short summary. She handed me a USB drive at the end. "Everything's on there," she said, including the summary report. The waiter came by, and we ordered food neither of us particularly needed. We ate some of it. "I'm sorry," she said, near the end. "I want you to know I didn't come to you until I was absolutely sure, and I didn't come to you because I was angry at her, even though I am. I came to you because you deserved to know." I looked at her across the table. "Thank you for not making this easier than it is." She tilted her head slightly, like she wasn't sure how to take that. "What does that mean?" "It means you handled it like someone who respects me enough not to soften the corners. That matters." She nodded and looked at her plate. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do," I said. "Think before I move." She walked me to my car after we paid. In the parking lot, she handed me a card, her investigator's contact in case I needed anything further. I told her I'd be in touch. "Be careful," she said, not dramatic about it, just a fact. "I will," I said, and I meant it. That night, I took the couch. Claire was already asleep when I got in, or performing sleep convincingly, which had begun to feel like the same thing. I lay in the dark of the living room and ran through the sequence I'd need to follow. Not the emotional sequence, the practical one. Attorney first, financial review, protect the accounts we held jointly, document what I had, move slowly and on my own timeline, not hers. I fell asleep sometime around 2 and woke before the alarm. The attorney I reached out to the next morning had done contract work for me twice in the past. A man named Horton with a quiet downtown office and the kind of steady demeanor that makes people feel like their problem is manageable even when it isn't. I was in his conference room by 8:30 with the folder Margot had given me and a short list of questions that had organized themselves during the drive. He looked through everything without commentary. When he closed the folder, he set his hands flat on the table. "You didn't confront her." "No." "Good, don't." He leaned back slightly. "The moment this becomes a conversation between you and her, you've handed her time she'll use. Let us control the timeline." He paused. "You'll want to separate your finances. Nothing dramatic, just stop feeding joint accounts while we sort what's marital and what isn't. If you have any assets that predate the marriage, we need to document those now." I had a short list of those too. I handed him the second folder I'd brought. He read it, looked at me over the top of it. "You came prepared." "I had 10 days," I said. "Then we can start today." We started that day. I flew back out for the final rotation of that project 3 days later. Claire dropped me at the airport with the warmth she'd been deploying since my return. Specific, calibrated, well-timed. She kissed me at the curb and told me to text when I landed. I told her I would. I sent the text from the gate and she replied with a heart. She called once that week. I picked up, kept it brief, told her the project was nearly done. She said she couldn't wait for things to slow down. I agreed. I did not ask where she'd been that afternoon because Margot's investigator had already answered the question. The last day of the rotation, Horton emailed a short status update. Paperwork drafted, ready to execute on your return. Confirm date. I confirmed the date. The morning I landed, I didn't go home. I went to Horton's office from the airport with my carry-on still in hand and signed everything at the conference table with the same quiet a man brings to any serious task. When I stood up and shook his hand, he said, "You've been very calm through this." "I've had time to work through it," I said. "Most people don't use that time well." "I know." I drove home. She met me at the door the same way she'd met me the last 2 times, arms ready, warmth deployed, the same performance at the same level of precision that should have told me earlier how practiced it was. She said she'd made lunch. I stepped inside and left my bag by the door. "Before we eat," I said, and handed her the envelope. She looked at it for a moment without taking it. Then she took it. Her hands opened the flap with a care that suggested she already understood what this was. She read the first page. Her eyes moved slowly over the words, the way eyes move when the brain is refusing to cooperate with what's in front of them. When she looked up, her face had lost whatever arrangement it had been keeping. "Margot," I said. "She had someone watching. I have the photos, the dates, the report." She said nothing. "You have until this evening to get what you need. I'll have someone here. You can arrange a time for the rest of your things with a third party present." "Dean," my name in her mouth like a question. "The paperwork is already filed." "Please, don't," I said it evenly, not loudly. "Don't give me the version where this is salvageable. I've already done that math." She sat down on the bench in the entryway. She put the papers in her lap and pressed her palms against her knees. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her look, which is a thing that happens when the architecture someone has been building around themselves comes down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I said, and I left. I called Margot from the driveway. She picked up on the first ring. "It's done," I said. A pause. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I'm hungry, and I owe you a dinner, which I'd like to start paying back tonight, if you're available." A longer pause. Then she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that doesn't worry about how it lands. "Give me an hour. I'll be outside in 45 minutes, I said. I drove to a spot across town where nobody knew me, parked in front of a restaurant I'd never been to, and sat in the car for about 10 minutes just listening to the engine tick. Then I went inside and got a table by the window and ordered a coffee and waited for Margot, who arrived 12 minutes later in the same gray jacket, slightly out of breath from the parking situation, apologizing for the 2-minute delay. "You're on time," I told her. "I'm 2 minutes late," she said. "You're exactly on time," I said again, and she understood I wasn't talking about the clock. We ate dinner in the way 2 people eat when neither of them wants to perform anything, slowly, without agenda, saying true things in between bites. She told me about a trip she'd been planning to cancel and had now decided not to cancel. I told her about the elevator project, the rails, the inspector who'd become oddly personal about the whole thing. She laughed at the right moments because she was actually listening, which is rarer than people pretend. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you regret not saying more to her when you handed her the papers?" I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which is a different thing from having the answer ready. "I said what needed to be said," I told her. "Anything more would have been for my benefit, not for clarity. I don't need the satisfaction of a long speech. I needed the door closed." She nodded slowly. "That's a specific kind of self-control." "It's not self-control," I said. "It's knowing what the conversation is actually for." She picked her fork back up. "I like that." "I know." I said, and she looked at me quickly like she wasn't sure if that meant something. I let her decide. My phone had been vibrating at irregular intervals since I'd left the house. I turned it face down after the third time and didn't lift it again. Margot noticed and didn't say anything about it, which was the right call. We stayed until the restaurant started stacking chairs around the edges. We walked out into a night that had gone cold and clear and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the particular quiet of a city that has moved on to its next hour. "Thank you," I said, "for doing the hard part first." "You'd have done the same," she said. "I'd like to think mi pareja." She looked at me for a moment. "You would have," she said, and I believed her. I drove home to an empty house. Not empty in the alarming sense, just empty in the way a room is empty when its furniture has been rearranged and you're not sure yet where everything should go. Claire had taken what she needed. The rest was still in place. I walked through each room slowly, not checking for damage, just reorienting. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the window over the sink for a while. The next morning I went for a run. The morning after that I called my brother and told him the short version. He listened without filling every silence with advice, which is a skill not enough people have developed. "You good?" he asked when I finished. "I'm getting there," I said. "That's the right answer," he said. "The wrong answer is I'm fine. You're not fine yet, and that's correct." I laughed. First real one in a while. It felt like something loosening. Margot and I had 3 more dinners over the following weeks. Nothing rushed, nothing performed. The kind of evenings that build themselves honestly because neither person is trying to make them into something they aren't yet. She was clear-eyed and specific, and she had a way of disagreeing with me that didn't feel like a contest, which I'd come to think of as rarer than it should be. On the 4th dinner, she said, "I want you to know I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you." "I know you're not," I said. "I want to make sure you know that." "Margot." I set my glass down. "You hired a private investigator because it was the right thing to do, and then you texted a married man because that was also the right thing to do, and both of those things took a kind of precision that doesn't come from pity. I know who you are." She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. Horton's office confirmed the final documents 3 weeks later. The process had moved efficiently. Claire hadn't contested much, which Horton said was either guilt or the advice of her attorney, and probably both. I sent her a single message when it was done. "The papers are final. I hope things go well for you." She replied with a paragraph one didn't read past the first sentence. "I didn't need to. That's not cruelty, that's proportion." The house settled into its new shape over the following months. I kept the kitchen the way I liked it. I got a better coffee maker. I called my brother more often. I did the job site work with the same focus I'd always brought to it, which turns out to be steadier when you're not spending a portion of your attention managing a performance you didn't know you'd been watching. Margot started leaving a jacket at my place. I started keeping her coffee order in mind. These are the ways things begin when they begin correctly. Not with declarations, but with small, accurate choices made in the right direction. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a cup in both hands and said, "You seem like yourself." "I think I am," I said. "Good," she said. "That's the version I'm interested in." I looked at her for a moment. The gray jacket on the chair behind her, the easy way she occupied space in a room that used to feel like it had furniture in the wrong places. "Stay," I said. "Not a performance, just the word, direct." She looked at me steadily. "Are you sure about the timing?" "I measured twice," I said. She smiled. "Then yeah," she said, "I'll stay." We spent that Saturday moving things around. Her books on the shelf in the living room, her extra coffee mugs in the cabinet, a plant she'd been nursing back to health on the windowsill where the morning light would reach it. My neighbor from across the street watched us carry boxes from her car with the expression of a man who has been waiting for the general situation to improve and is relieved to see evidence that it has. That evening we sat at the kitchen table while the last of the light came through the window and made the whole room look the way rooms look in the good part of a memory. Margot put her hand flat on the table between us. I put mine next to it. "First night," she said. "First night," I said. She looked at the room. The books on the shelf, the plant on the sill, the coffee maker I'd upgraded, the table that had held its shape through everything that table had held. "It's good here," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It is. That's the whole story, more or less." The version people on the outside tend to want is the dramatic one. The confrontation, the tears, the righteous speech at the door. I understand the appetite for that version, but what actually happened was quieter and, I think, more honest. A man paid attention. A woman did the right thing when it was costly. Some paperwork moved across a conference table, a door closed, another one opened, not immediately, but in the right order. What I know now that I didn't know 18 months ago is that the state of a relationship is not what it looks like on a good night with candles on the counter. It's what it looks like on the ordinary nights, the unremarkable ones, when nobody is performing anything and the room is just whatever it actually is. This is what an ordinary night looks like now. Coffee on the table, Margot reading something, and occasionally saying a sentence out loud that she thinks I'll find interesting. The plant on the windowsill that has, against reasonable odds, gotten a second leaf. Simple, accurate, mine.